Now there are two different grades that we use to determine something to do with value. The first one is quality grade. Quality grade is an estimate of how good the meat's going to taste, eating satisfaction, tenderness, juiciness, and flavor. The other grading grade for USDA beef grades is yield grade. Yield grade is an estimate of lean meat yield. How much meat are we going to get out of that carcass, and how much fat and bone are we going to have to throw away? The true definition of yield grade is percent closely trimmed, boneless, retail cuts from the round, loin, rib, and chuck. So let's talk about quality grading first. Here we have a quality grading chart. And this is the chart that the USDA grader would use, that person with a blue hat that works for USDA Ag Marketing Service. And if you look across the top of that chart, you'll see A, B, C, D, and E. And above that it says carcass maturity. We call it carcass maturity because we don't know the actual age of most of the animals that come through. We don't have birth records. So we're going to look at the carcass to get a rough idea of how old that animal was when it was harvested, and it's actually a pretty accurate system, as we'll explain in a minute. If you look down the side of this chart, you'll see it says marbling. Marbling are those flecks of fat totally inside the muscle, the lean. Now carcasses are going to be ribbed between the 12th and 13th rib, and at that cross section we're going to be able to see the marbling levels in the longismus muscle. We also call that more commonly the ribeye muscle. Whatever the marbling level is at this one place on the beef carcass, okay, a quality grade is assessed at that one place, and that is the quality grade for the entire carcass. So that's the lean cut surface that they look at for marbling. And you notice the terms on this chart go from practically devoid to abundant, which are just fanciful names to describe different levels of marbling inside the muscle. Now, marbling, the scientific name for that is intramuscular fat. That's fat within the muscle. It has to be totally encircled by lean. Now, as you look across the chart, you'll see different grades: prime, choice, select, and standard. Those are the grades for the younger animals. Those are animals that would fit into the A and B maturity. You notice A maturity, you can have prime, choice, select, and standard. If it's B maturity, it's only prime, choice, and standard. Notice the white line. On the other side of the white line, where it's C, D, and E maturity, if you look at the top, you'll see the grades commercial and utility. Those are grades for the old cull cows and bulls, and that grading system and those cattle are hardly ever graded because there's no need to if I'm going to grind the meats from those animals or I'm going to take lean strips of beef from those animals. And so they don't grade the old cull cows and bulls, market cows from that would come to those particular plants. But those young animals that come out of a feed yard, generally they're going to be A maturity, and we'll explain why that is in a minute, and they're going to qualify for the prime, choice, select, and standard grades. So first of all, it's important to point out that much of the information we're going to talk about with both quality grading and yield grading is given to the grader and assessed first of all by a machine. That machine is called E+V, and it's a machine that was developed in Germany and is now being used widely across the United States as an instrument to help the grader gather information so he or she can come up with a final quality grade and yield grade for that carcass. When we look at the quality grading system, the one thing that machine can't determine is overall age of the animal when it was harvested. And so as you remember, there's different grades for the young animals versus the old. So how does a grader quickly look at a carcass to determine whether that animal is old or young? Because they don't have birth records. That information generally never makes it past the cow-calf producer. And so what they're going to do is they're going to look at the skeleton and the color of the lean to determine the age of the animal. And as you look at these pictures here, you'll see the skeleton. And first of all, they're going to look at the backbone of those animals. And then they're going to look specifically at the backbone portion just below the ribeye. Here's a carcass that's been ribbed between the 12th and 13th rib. And as you can see, there's a little red box, and that red box identifies the place that a grader will look. And as you look at that box, you'll see, first of all, as we go from left to right, as you're looking at it, you'll see the body of the vertebrae. You see a place where the spinal cord was, and then you'll see these finger bones. These are bones that project out of the body of the vertebrae. And you can see how that looks on the carcass as you look at the black and white skeleton to the side. And so as we zero in on that area and look first of all where it says A maturity and where that finger is pointing. Okay, that finger is pointing on a cartilaginous button that sits on the very top of that feather bone. So as you look at this picture, again going left to right, you'll see the feather, the body of the vertebrae, see where the spinal cord was, and then the feather bones that project out of the body of the vertebrae. And on the very end of that is a cartilaginous tip. It's totally cartilage, it's white, it's soft, I can stick a knife right through that. And an interesting thing happens as animals get older. That cartilage begins to turn to bone. And so that cartilage, as you look at it, it's a process called ossification. Ossification is the process of cartilage turning to bone, and it's a gradual process and actually starts in the round and works its way down through the loin, then into the rib, and then finally into the shoulder area. That process of those cartilaginous buttons begin to turn to bone. You can see that in the B maturity picture. You'll see a little bit of red in that circle in the very tip of the cartilaginous buttons. That's an indication that that animal is slightly older than that one that had no ossification and no bone inside the cartilage. And so an inspector can very quickly look at a carcass and determine whether it's old or young. The majority of animals out of a feed yard, okay, as they come to the packing plant, are somewhere probably between 14 and 24 months of age, with a more narrow range of 18 to 22 months of age. Those cattle, as they come, if you look at the chart that I'm showing you here, the approximate chronological age for an A maturity animal is 9 months to 30 months of age. So if the average feed yard steer or heifer is 18 to 22 months coming out of a feed yard, then those animals are A maturity. And in fact, we've done research, the National Beef Quality Audit, where we showed that 96% of the cattle that come out of a feed yard, those fed steers and heifers, those young animals, 96% are A maturity. Okay, another small percent are B maturity, and 1 or 2% is in that C maturity. And you'll notice that if there are A maturity, and then those cattle, based off of marbling in that 12th rib cross section, and that determination, that's how we determine whether they're prime, choice, select, or standard. So let's look at marbling. So these are the same 6 pictures that the grader would use when they evaluate marbling in the 12th rib cross section of a beef carcass. And you'll see in the first one it says slight. If we look at the chart, an A maturity carcass that has a slight amount of marbling, that would be USDA select. The next picture over in the middle at the bottom row, you'll see it says small. An A maturity carcass that has a small amount of marbling would be a low choice. Then you'll see the modest and moderate pictures. Those are pictures, if you look again, A maturity cattle that have a modest or moderate amount of marbling, they're still choice. So there's actually 3 degrees of marbling, and that's what we call them, degrees. Everyone, small is a degree of marbling, modest is a degree of marbling. 3 degrees of marbling in the choice grade. Then you'll see it says slightly abundant. Slightly abundant is that minimum level of marbling, the degree of marbling that's required for an A maturity carcass to grade prime. So as you look at that, you'll see slight. If it has that amount of marbling, then it's A maturity, then it's going to be select. If it has less than that, then it's USDA standard. Then you see small, that's the minimum for the choice grade. Slightly abundant is the minimum for the prime grade. Now I do want to point out one other term, and it's called top choice. Top choice is the level of marbling that's modest or moderate. We will actually refer to that as top choice. Another name for it is upper 2/3 choice. The reason they call it upper 2/3 is there are 3 degrees of marbling. Okay, there's small, modest, and moderate. Well, the modest and moderate part, those 2 are the upper 2/3, the upper 2 degrees of marbling, so they call that upper 2/3 choice. Another term is top choice, another term is premium choice. And certified Angus beef is an example of one of those top choice beef programs. So what I want to do now is I want you to stop and I want you to go do a little worksheet. And we're going to show you some pictures, and I want you to try to guess what the quality grade is for each one of 10 different marbling pictures. So what you're going to see are 12th rib cross sections, and these are all A maturity cattle, so these are all young animals. And so you need to look at the slight, small, modest, moderate, slightly abundant, moderately abundant pictures, and then compare that to what you see in the 12th rib cross section that we're presenting you and estimate the quality grade.